Diego Navarro had spent 45 minutes alone at his table at the restaurant La Azadi in Madrid, watching the clock as his coffee went cold. Another failed blind date, orchestrated by his meddling sister Carmen. He was about to get up, leave money on the table, and swear to never again give in to his sister's insistence when a little girl of about 4, with blonde braids and a pink dress, timidly approached his table. The little girl's blue eyes were full of seriousness when she spoke in a voice that seemed too mature for her age. Her mom was sorry for being late, she explained. Something bad had happened and she couldn't come earlier, but she was here to explain everything. Diego looked at the girl, then scanned the restaurant for an accompanying adult. There was no one, just a little girl looking at him with a vulnerability that squeezed his heart. What he would discover in the following minutes would change not only that night, but the rest of his life. Diego Navarro, 34, a successful architect with a studio in the heart of Madrid, hadn't wanted to be there. He'd only caved because his sister Carmen had hounded him for weeks. "Sofia is perfect for you," Carmen had insisted. A widow with a little girl, smart, kind, just one meeting. Diego had resisted ever since his relationship ended 3 years ago. He'd focused on work. His architecture firm was thriving. He'd landed a major contract, and his life was exactly how he wanted it, orderly, predictable, under control. There was no room for emotional complications. But Carmen had insisted, organized everything, even chosen the restaurant La Azadi, with its impressive view of the Gran Via. In the end, Diego had caved just to get her off his back. Now he was sitting alone as the minutes dragged by. At 8 p.m., there was no sign of Sofia. At 8:15, he ordered a coffee. At 8:30, he was getting pitying looks from the waitress. By 8:45, anger was starting to replace embarrassment. Not only had he been pressured into a date he didn't want, but he'd also been stood up. He pulled out his wallet, determined to close this ridiculous night. That's when he saw her. A little girl, no more than 4, with perfectly tied blonde braids and pink ribbons. She was walking through the restaurant with a seriousness that seemed absurd on her cherubic face. Her blue eyes scanned the tables as if looking for someone. Then those eyes fixed on him. The girl stopped, tilted her head as if assessing if he was the right person, then approached with determined steps. Diego looked around for a parent. There had to be one somewhere, but the girl came straight to his table. Her name was Lucia, she said clearly. Her mom was sorry for being late. Something bad had happened and she couldn't come earlier. But she was here to explain everything. The words came out as if carefully memorized. Diego felt alarm bells go off in his mind. A 4-year-old girl alone in a Madrid restaurant at night? Where was her mother? What had happened? He looked around again but saw no one who seemed to be looking for a lost child. The little girl's eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back. Grandma had fallen and gotten really hurt, she explained. Mom had to take her to the emergency room and couldn't leave her alone because the babysitter hadn't come. So she had sent her here to explain. The words came out in a torrent held back too long. Diego felt his heart tighten, but the little girl hadn't come alone, she added, shaking her head vigorously. Aunt Carmen had brought her. She was outside in the car. She had told her to be brave and explain why Mom couldn't come. Diego froze. Aunt Carmen. His sister. That meant Sofia, the blind date, was Carmen's best friend. And that best friend had sent her 4-year-old daughter to apologize while she rushed to the hospital with her mother. He looked at Lucia and saw in those blue eyes a vulnerability that hit him like a punch. This child had been sent on an adult mission, trying to be brave while clearly wanting to cry. He stood up, knelt to her height, and told her she'd been very brave. They would go talk to Aunt Carmen together. The relief that swept the girl's face was immediate. Lucia nodded. Then she did something Diego didn't expect. She took his hand, a small, warm, trusting hand. And as they walked toward the exit, Diego felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Parked outside in the no parking zone was Carmen's red seat. When she saw Diego and Lucia come out, she rolled down the window with a guilty expression. She explained quickly. Sofia was at La Paz Hospital. Her mother had a possible broken femur, the babysitter cancelled at the last minute, total chaos. She hadn't planned to send Lucia in. The girl had insisted. She wanted to explain to the nice man why her mom couldn't come. Carmen stopped, looking at Lucia with affection. Then she added something important. The girl was special, very mature for her age. She'd had to be, after losing her father 2 years ago in a traffic accident. Sofia had been alone ever since, raising Lucia and caring for her elderly mother. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer to be present. She was the strongest person Carmen knew. Diego looked at Lucia, who was watching him with those big eyes. 2 years. The girl had lost her father at 2. And tonight this little warrior had been brave enough to walk into a restaurant alone to keep a promise. A decision formed in Diego's mind before he could analyze it. He turned to Lucia and asked if she would like to go see her mom at the hospital, and maybe get something to eat on the way since she probably hadn't had dinner. Lucia's eyes lit up immediately. Carmen looked at him incredulously. Diego knew nothing about kids. The last time he'd held a baby, he'd looked terrified. But Diego insisted. Carmen looked stressed. She could go home. He would take care of everything. Lucia had already decided for everyone, squeezing Diego's hand tighter and smiling for the first time. Diego helped Lucia into the back seat of his Audi, making sure her seatbelt was fastened. When he got behind the wheel and looked in the rearview mirror, he saw the girl watching him with a trust he hadn't earned yet, but was determined to. On the drive to McDonald's, Lucia chattered freely. She talked about her daycare, her best friend Sarah, her favorite stuffed animal, a rabbit named Capito. She talked about her mother with such pure affection that it sparked Diego's curiosity. Who was this Sofia who had raised such a special girl while facing widowhood and responsibilities? In the McDonald's parking lot, eating French fries with a 4-year-old who was laughing because she had ketchup on her nose, Diego realized he hadn't felt this relaxed in years. Between bites, Lucia told him how her mom read her stories every night, how they baked cookies together on Saturdays, how grandma told wonderful stories. And then, with the frankness of children, Lucia said something that stopped Diego cold. Mom was sad sometimes. At night, when she thought she was sleeping, she could hear her crying. She said she missed Dad. She didn't remember much about Dad, she was little, but she missed him too because Mom was sad. Aunt Carmen said Mom needed someone to make her smile again. Dad would have wanted Mom to be happy. Then Lucia looked at him with those wise eyes and asked if he made people smile. The question hit him unexpectedly. He answered honestly that he tried, but wasn't always good at it. Lucia nodded as if she understood, saying that Mom said trying is what counts. That simple wisdom, spoken by a girl eating French fries, struck Diego more than any motivational speech he'd ever heard. La Paz Hospital at night was a place of fluorescent lights and endless hallways. Diego held Lucia's hand as they followed the signs. The girl had insisted on bringing her unfinished ice cream, carefully wrapped in a napkin. At the front desk, a nurse directed them to the waiting room. Mrs. Blanca was still being evaluated, her daughter with her. As they walked, Diego felt his nerves tighten. He was about to meet Sofia in a hospital, accompanied by her daughter, whom he'd just spent the last hour with. It wasn't exactly how he'd imagined a first meeting. It was Lucia who found her mother first. The girl's cry made several heads turn. Lucia let go of Diego's hand and ran toward a woman sitting in a corner with her head in her hands. The woman looked up, and Diego felt his breath catch. Sofia Martin was beautiful, not in the polished way of models, but in a real, authentic way. Messy chestnut hair, delicate features, eyes the same blue as Lucia's, but marked by exhaustion, clearly dressed in a hurry. When she saw Lucia, her face transformed. She jumped up and took the girl in her arms, holding her tight. Her voice broke as she apologized repeatedly. She held Lucia as if she were an anchor in a storm. Lucia explained excitedly that she was fine, that Mr. Diego had taken her to McDonald's, and they'd had fries and nuggets, and she even had ice cream for her. It was only then that Sophia noticed Diego standing a distance away, hands in his pockets, suddenly feeling out of place. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos of the hospital seemed to fade. Sophia put Lucia down and approached Diego with uncertain steps, quickly wiping her eyes. She introduced herself, apologizing profusely. She didn't know where to start. The date. Then sending Lucia, it must have been an absurd night for him. Diego interrupted, saying it had been interesting. Lucia had been brave and charming. They hadn't had a traditional date, but the night had been memorable. Sophia looked at him, trying to see if he was being sarcastic. When she saw he was sincere, something in her face softened. Diego asked about her mother. Sophia sighed, worry returning. Confirmed fractured femur. Surgery tomorrow morning. Months of rehabilitation. She didn't know how she would manage with work, Lucia, the house. She stopped, realizing she was dumping her problems on a stranger. Diego sent Lucia to the vending machine with €2, leaving the two adults relatively alone. He turned to Sophia, explaining he understood if she wanted to forget the date had ever happened, but he would like to get to know her better. Under normal circumstances, maybe coffee when things calmed down. Sophia seemed incredulous. After all this, he didn't want to run away? Diego smiled, saying, strangely, no. Her daughter had won him over with fries and wisdom, and he had a feeling Sophia had an interesting story to tell. For the first time that night, Sophia gave a real smile, a tired but genuine one. Coffee would be nice, she said, when life got back to normal. Diego said it didn't need to be normal. He could bring Lucia, too. Apparently, they were already friends. Sophia laughed, a light sound that made heads turn in the waiting room. Lucia came back loaded with snacks. She couldn't decide, so she'd gotten a bit of everything. As she distributed the snacks, chattering about the vending machines, Diego watched Sophia watch her daughter with a love so pure and weary it squeezed his heart. This woman had raised a child alone for 2 years, worked, cared for an elderly mother, and instead of crumbling, she had raised a confident, happy, brave little girl. That strength was more attractive than any physical beauty. When it was time to leave, Lucia hugged Diego fiercely. She whispered that Mom had smiled when she saw him. She hadn't smiled in a long time. Driving home through nighttime Madrid, Diego realized something had changed. His orderly world had been shaken by a 4-year-old girl and a mother he hadn't even properly met, and instead of feeling disturbed, he felt alive. 3 days passed before Diego heard from Sophia. A text came while he was reviewing projects at the office. Her mother had been operated on and was recovering well. If the coffee offer still stood, she'd love to. And Lucia hadn't stopped asking about him, the nice man with the fries. They met at Café Botanico, a quiet spot with outdoor tables near El Retiro. It was a surprisingly warm October day. Diego arrived first, nervous in a way he didn't remember being in years. When Sophia and Lucia arrived, Diego was struck again by how beautiful Sophia was without the crisis. Hair down, a simple blue dress that highlighted her eyes. Lucia immediately ran to him. While the girl played in the park under their watchful eyes, Diego and Sophia talked for the first time. Sophia told him about her life, how she'd met Marco in college, both design students, how Lucia had been their joy after years of trying, how the traffic accident 2 years ago had taken Marco in an instant, leaving her a widow at 29 with a 2-year-old. The first months were terrible. She didn't know how to go on, how to explain to Lucia that Daddy wasn't coming back, how to pay the bills. Her mother had helped a lot by moving in. Diego said softly that she had created a life. Lucia was extraordinary, happy, secure. Sophia tried to hold back tears, explaining she tried every day to be strong for Lucia, but it was hard being both mother and father, working, but not missing her daughters growing up. And now, with her mother injured. She stopped, apologizing for dumping everything. Diego said she could be honest. When Carmen had told him about the date, he hadn't wanted to come. He thought it was another failed attempt. When no one showed, he was ready to be angry and leave. But then Lucia came, that brave little girl who walked in to keep a promise. In that half hour, he had felt something he hadn't in years: connection, joy, the sense there was more beyond blueprints. So thank you for sending Lucia. It wasn't planned, but it changed something. Sophia nodded, understanding completely. Diego continued, explaining that meeting her now, knowing her story, seeing her strength, he wanted to know more. He wanted to take her to dinner. A real dinner, without hospital emergencies. Sophia laughed, the sound Diego was beginning to love. She would love that. Really? The weeks passed. Dinner became dinners, plural. Diego began to become part of Sophia and Lucia's life in natural, inevitable ways. He helped Sophia with hospital visits, entertaining Lucia during long afternoons. He took Lucia to the park when Sophia had urgent projects. He even began learning the girl's favorite stories, reading them in funny voices that made her laugh. And somewhere between ice cream and story time, between serious conversations and laughter, Diego realized he was falling in love. Not just with Sophia and her strength and kindness, but with the whole little family, with the messy, love-filled life they represented. But with love came fear. One night, 2 months after their meeting, Diego found himself in his empty apartment, looking out at Madrid. He'd just returned from a day at the Children's Museum with Sophia and Lucia. The girl had called him just Diego for the first time, without the mister. When Sophia had looked at him with eyes full of emotion, panic had begun to rise. What was he doing? He was falling for a woman with a child, a ready-made family. He was about to enter territory he didn't know: parenthood, even if not biological, responsibility, vulnerability, everything he'd protected himself from since his previous breakup. He called Carmen, confessing he'd made a mistake. Carmen, who knew him better than anyone, understood immediately he was running. Diego defended himself, saying he was reconsidering. It was too much, too fast. An instant family, he didn't know how to be a father. Carmen was firm. No one knows how to be a parent until they are one. She'd seen him these past 2 months, transformed. He laughed more. He was lighter. Lucia adored him, and Sophia, she had seen how they looked at each other. He shouldn't throw something beautiful away out of fear. Diego protested that he was afraid of ruining it all. Lucia had already lost one father. Carmen interrupted, exactly. She lost a father to a cruel twist of fate. You wouldn't be abandoning her, you'd be showing up, every day. That counts. Diego stayed up that night thinking about Carmen's words. He thought of Lucia laughing on the swing, of Sophia resting her head on his shoulder, of how his apartment felt empty now. The next morning, he made a decision. For the first time, he wouldn't run. He would choose love, despite the fear. But before he could tell Sophia, she called him. Her voice was tense, scared. Could they talk? They met in a small park. Lucia was at school, and Sophia looked like she hadn't slept. Diego felt his heart tighten, asking what was wrong. Sophia began, explaining they needed to talk about them. The 2 months had been wonderful. He had been wonderful with Lucia, with her, but she had realized she didn't know if it was right. Lucia was getting too attached. She called him her Diego. She asked for him when he wasn't there. And she was afraid. If it didn't work out, if he decided a ready-made family was too much, she couldn't put Lucia through another loss. Diego understood. She wasn't leaving him. She was protecting her daughter. And that proof of a mother's love made him understand with certainty what he had to do. He asked her to look at him. He'd been scared too, he explained. Last night he'd almost called to say it was too fast. But he'd realized something. He was scared because this mattered. She mattered. Lucia mattered. It was terrifying because he could fail. He might not be the father Lucia deserved. But he promised her one thing: he wouldn't run. Not when things got hard. Not when Lucia had a bad day. Not when life got chaotic. He was here. He chose to be here, for both of them. Sofia burst into tears. Diego held her as she sobbed, years of fear and loneliness finding an escape. She whispered she didn't want to put him through this. It wasn't fair. Diego replied that love was never fair. It was messy, scary, complicated. But it was also the best thing that had happened to him. She was the best. They stood embraced in that park as Madrid woke up around them. When they pulled apart, they both knew they had crossed something important. They had chosen love despite the fear. 6 months after that day in the park, Diego found himself nervous again, but this time it was a good, excited nervousness. It was Saturday morning, and he was about to do something he'd planned for weeks. Sofia thought they were just taking Lucia to El Retiro for a picnic. She didn't know Carmen was already there, setting everything up. She didn't know her mother, now recovered and walking with a cane, was sitting on a bench waiting. She didn't know this would be the day that changed everything. When they arrived and Lucia saw Grandma Blanca, she ran to her with a shout. Sofia looked at Diego, confused. He explained he had a gift for Lucia. Well, for both of them. He led Sofia to an area decorated with balloons and colorful banners. There was a table with a cake, and around it were a few people, Carmen and mutual friends. Sofia asked what all this was. Diego called Lucia over. He knelt to her height, explaining he loved her and her mom very much. He was wondering if she would like him to be part of their family forever, not just as the fries man, but as someone who would always be there. Lucia asked, like a dad? Diego felt his voice break as he confirmed, if you want me to be. Lucia's answer was to launch herself into his arms with all her might. Yes, she wanted him to be her dad. Amid tears and laughter, Diego stood up, still holding Lucia, and turned to Sofia. From his pocket, he pulled a velvet box. He didn't kneel, he couldn't, with Lucia in his arms, and in a way, it was perfect. It was a reflection of what they were becoming, a family, all together. He explained that these 6 months had been the best of his life. She had taught him what it truly means to love, to be brave despite fear. Lucia had taught him that family is a choice. So he was asking. Would she marry him? Would she let him love her and Lucia forever? Sofia was crying too hard to answer. Lucia answered for her, tugging on her mom's dress, say yes, Mama, please. Sofia laughed through her tears. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. Applause erupted. Diego put Lucia down to hug Sofia, kissing her as the little girl danced around them, laughing. Grandma Blanca cried happy tears, supported by a teary-eyed Carmen. The party was full of joy. Lucia kept telling everyone she was getting a dad. Sofia looked at the ring in awe, and Diego, looking at his future family, realized he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Later, as the sun set, Diego was sitting on a blanket with Lucia asleep in his lap and Sofia leaning against him. Sofia whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" he asked. "For not running. For choosing us. For being the man Marco would have wanted for us." Diego kissed her head. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me the chance. For teaching me that love is always worth the risk." 2 years later, on their wedding day in a small church on the outskirts of Madrid, Lucia stole the show. At 6 years old, the pink-clad flower girl had a special task. During the ceremony, the officiant called her forward. In her hand was a small box. Lucia explained it held her dad Marco's wedding ring. Mom said he couldn't be here, but he would be happy that Diego was taking care of them. So this ring was for him, to remember he was part of the family. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Diego knelt, tears streaming, as Lucia placed the ring on his finger. He whispered that he would honor it every day. The reception was full of laughter, dancing, and love. But the moment Diego would remember forever came at the end of the night. Lucia, exhausted, came up to him and called him Papa Diego for the first time without hesitation. "I'm happy you went to the restaurant that night," she said. "I'm happy your mom was late," Diego laughed, lifting her into his arms. Because sometimes failed dates lead to the truest connections. Sometimes a mother's delay leads to a meeting that changes 3 lives. And sometimes the family we choose is even stronger than the one we're born into. Like if you believe true love arrives when you least expect it. Comment if you, too, have found something precious in an unexpected situation. Share this story to remember that families are built with choice and love, not just blood. Subscribe for more stories showing that the best endings are born from the most chaotic beginnings. Sometimes missed dates are blessings in disguise. Sometimes a brave little girl is the bridge between 2 souls who need to heal. And sometimes the truest love is the one we build together, piece by piece, smile by smile, French fry by French fry. Because the best love stories don't start with a bolt of lightning, but with a daily choice to show up, to stay, to love despite the fear. And when we find someone worth that fear, we discover that courage is just love refusing to give up.